For years, Portia de Rossi kept her silence, choosing loyalty over confession and hope over the discomfort she carried inside her marriage. But when the pressure became impossible to ignore, the scrutiny, the imbalance, the emotional strain, something inside her finally began to fracture. Those close to the actress say she reached a point where the truth felt heavier than the consequences of revealing it. And now, after stepping back, after taking space to breathe and understand what she truly wants, Portia is ready to speak about the years she held everything in. For most of the world, Portia de Rossi and Ellen DeGeneres were the couple that had survived everything: the early backlash, the pressure of fame, the scandals, the rumors, the years of public adoration followed by years of relentless speculation. Their 2008 wedding had been a symbol of victory and visibility, a moment that seemed to confirm they were unbreakable. But in reality, the cracks had been forming long before whispers of separation began to circulate. What the public saw was love and unity. What insiders saw was a slow, quiet unraveling that neither woman wanted to say out loud. According to multiple sources over the past year, the shift began after Ellen stepped away from her talk show in 2022. DeGeneres had spent decades living inside a tight schedule, surrounded by handlers, staff, an audience that adored her, and a rhythm that kept her from sitting still long enough to feel the darker corners of her emotional world. When that ended, the silence was almost hostile. Those close to the couple said Ellen suddenly needed more reassurance, more closeness, more attention, while Portia, after years of being the stabilizing partner, desperately needed space to rediscover who she was outside Ellen's orbit. By 2024, when the couple relocated to the UK for a quieter life, the tension reportedly intensified. Portia wanted the move to be a reset, a chance for both of them to slow down and rebuild on steadier ground. But instead of breathing room, she found herself under even more scrutiny at home. According to one insider, Ellen began micromanaging everything: where Portia went, who she spoke to, what she did with her day. It came from a place of love, the source said, but it was suffocating. Portia, once known for her composure and devotion, reached a point where she quietly admitted to friends, "I need time to think. I need to know who I am when no one else is speaking for me." A pause she once feared now became the only way forward. Long before the tension of recent years, the beginnings of Portia and Ellen's relationship already carried emotional complexities that would follow them into the future. When they first met in 2001, both were committed to other partners. Ellen with photographer Alexandra Hedison, and Portia with filmmaker Francesca Gregorini. What began as a spark quickly grew into something neither woman could ignore. Portia would later confess that seeing Ellen for the first time made her knees weak, that she felt something once in a lifetime that terrified her as much as it thrilled her. But to choose each other meant dismantling the lives they were already living. They didn't intend to begin their relationship as something secretive or forbidden, yet that was the reality of their timing. When Ellen told Alexandra and Portia told Francesca, the pain they caused left emotional residue they didn't talk about for years. Portia carried guilt. Ellen carried the fear of being left again. And relationship experts often note that unless these emotional fractures are addressed early, they can quietly reappear much later, especially during times of pressure. Still, after meeting again in 2004, fate felt unavoidable. Portia finally stepped into the open, telling The Advocate that Ellen was the first person who made her feel safe enough to stop hiding her identity. Ellen, in turn, told people that she often lay awake at night whispering gratitude for having found a partner who understood her in ways no one else ever had. For a long time, it seemed the bond between them was stronger than anything life could throw at them. But strong love does not erase old wounds, it only holds them at bay. As Portia's fame grew with Arrested Development, and Ellen became one of the most powerful women in entertainment, the emotional imbalance they carried into the relationship, Portia's guilt, Ellen's need for reassurance, the unspoken fear of abandonment, remained quietly present. These shadows didn't break them then, but they never truly left either. And when the world later turned on Ellen, those old patterns began to resurface. Portia once again found herself holding the emotional weight for both of them, a role she had fulfilled for nearly 2 decades, until she finally reached her limit. When the workplace scandal surrounding the Ellen DeGeneres show exploded in 2020, it didn't just shake Ellen's public image. It destabilized the emotional structure of her marriage in ways neither she nor Portia expected. BuzzFeed's investigation, the accusations of a toxic environment, and the viral posts labeling Ellen as one of the meanest people alive turned the comedian into a global target overnight. Suddenly, the woman who had built her brand on kindness was facing a level of scrutiny she had never imagined. And while Portia stood beside her publicly, offering unwavering support, the pressure behind closed doors was far more complicated. Ellen later admitted the ordeal broke her heart, and that she wouldn't have survived it without Portia. But the deeper truth, according to insiders, was more painful. Portia had spent years rebuilding her own identity after a lifetime of eating disorders, industry pressure, and her struggle to live authentically. Becoming the emotional lifeline for someone engulfed in a career crisis reopened wounds she thought she had already healed. The imbalance in their relationship, long ignored, long softened by affection, suddenly became impossible to overlook. By the time Ellen's show ended in 2022, the dynamic between them had shifted dramatically. Ellen, no longer the industry powerhouse she once was, struggled to adapt to the quiet. She had spent decades surrounded by staff, structure, and routines. Without them, she turned inward, relying heavily on Portia for stability. But Portia, after years of cultivating independence and peace, felt herself being pulled back into a role she no longer had the strength to play. Sources later revealed that Ellen's vulnerability during that period, though understandable, became overwhelming for Portia. The once balanced partnership had become lopsided, with Portia giving more than she had left to give. And when they moved to the UK in 2024 hoping for a fresh start, the shift did not bring relief. It brought clarity. For Portia, the question was no longer whether she loved Ellen. It was whether love alone was enough to keep her from losing herself. As the couple tried to rebuild their life away from Hollywood, new and old red flags began resurfacing, not because either of them intended harm, but because the emotional strain had reached a point where every crack became visible. Portia had spent years trying to maintain stability, but Ellen's habits, shaped by decades of fame and control, didn't simply fade with retirement. Instead, they intensified. By mid-2024, insiders began to notice patterns that Portia herself could no longer overlook. Ellen, now without the constant structure of her show, became increasingly dependent on her wife. She wanted Portia with her everywhere, on errands, at home, during trips, at events. If Portia mentioned going for a jog, a ride, or even a quiet walk, she was met with questions that felt less like concern and more like surveillance. One source said bluntly, "Ellen hates being alone, so Portia was expected to be her shadow." What might have once felt protective now felt suffocating. Portia had already struggled with autonomy earlier in her life, from managing her identity in Hollywood to recovering from severe eating disorders, and rebuilding her personal power had taken years. The new level of control in the marriage felt like a step backward, not a partnership. The warning signs weren't only emotional. For years, tabloids had whispered about potential tension, but now even close friends privately wondered whether Portia was reaching a breaking point. Anne Heche's old warning resurfaced, too. Before her passing, Hetcha had told Portia directly that being with Ellen would not be easy. She even described Ellen as a red flag, stressing that Portia should be cautious. At the time, Portia dismissed it as bitterness from an ex. But as the dynamic at home shifted, those words returned to her with uncomfortable clarity. Layered on top of this was their 15-year age gap, which had once felt irrelevant. Now, as they navigated the idea of children, lifestyle differences, and long-term expectations, the gap became impossible to ignore. Portia felt younger emotionally, more eager to build a future on her own terms. Ellen, however, was settling into a phase of life that Portia wasn't ready for. For the first time in their marriage, Portia feared that staying meant losing herself completely. By early 2025, the emotional climate inside their marriage had shifted into something Portia could no longer ignore or rationalize away. What began as subtle exhaustion evolved into a deep internal conflict, the realization that she had spent years prioritizing Ellen's needs, Ellen's fears, Ellen's recovery, while her own voice grew smaller and smaller. Friends close to Portia began noticing changes. She was thoughtful, distant, and often paused before speaking, as if calculating how her words might ripple through the delicate balance at home. According to sources, this was when Portia finally told Ellen she needed space, not out of anger, but out of necessity. She wasn't leaving to punish her, she was stepping back because she couldn't breathe. The micromanagement, the emotional dependence, the constant presence Ellen demanded, it had begun to consume her daily life. Even simple independence like going for a ride or grabbing coffee alone had become a negotiation. "She can't go on like this," one insider admitted. "She's trying to save herself before she disappears into the marriage completely." Privately, Portia also confronted the truth she had avoided for years. She had entered the relationship at a moment when she was still finding herself, still fragile from eating disorders and the pressure of hiding her identity. Ellen had been her anchor then, the person who pulled her out of the darkness. But anchors can become weights when the tide changes. Portia was no longer the insecure young actress needing protection. She was a woman who wanted her own autonomy, passion projects, and emotional space. This shift frightened Ellen deeply. She had already lost career stability, public favor, and the sense of purpose her show once gave her. The idea of losing Portia, the one constant through decades of chaos, was devastating. But while Ellen clung tighter, Portia pulled further away. She wasn't running toward another person or another life. She was running toward herself. For the first time, Portia allowed herself to explore what life might look like without being absorbed into Ellen's world. A life where she could rebuild her identity on her own terms. When Portia finally stepped away, emotionally first, then physically, the silence that followed was louder than any public statement she could have made. For nearly 2 decades, she had been the calm center of Ellen's storm, the person who steadied the house when fame, scandal, pressure, and insecurity threatened to tear it apart. But now she was the one unraveling quietly, and for the first time she allowed herself to say what she had never dared to voice. "I need time. I need myself back." Those close to her say the moment she admitted this, everything shifted. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a final door slam. It was a soft, exhausted truth, the kind that emerges only after years of carrying more weight than one person should. Portia didn't blame Ellen. She didn't accuse her. Instead, she laid out the reality with heartbreaking clarity. Their life together had become too small for her to grow in, too controlled for her to breathe, too centered on Ellen's needs for her to recognize her own. And stepping back was the only thing that felt honest anymore. Speculation about divorce exploded instantly, fueled by tabloids, insiders, fans, and critics, each one trying to interpret the silence. But Portia didn't rush to correct anyone. For the first time in her adult life, she was not performing, not protecting, not smoothing over cracks for the sake of public perception. She was simply being still, listening to the parts of herself she had ignored for years. Her decision to take space didn't mean the love was gone. It meant the love for herself had finally resurfaced. Ellen, devastated but respectful, was forced to confront the reality that her actions, even the ones rooted in fear and protection, had contributed to the distance between them. She had built her entire life on the idea of kindness, yet the person closest to her had felt suffocated. Now, Portia's voice, quiet for so long, is finally emerging. And though she hasn't spoken publicly about their future, those close to her believe this moment marks the beginning of a new chapter, one where she chooses clarity over fear, independence over habit, and truth over silence. Portia de Rossi's decision to step back has raised more questions than answers, but one thing is clear. After years of silence, she is finally choosing herself. Whether this distance becomes healing or a turning point, only time will tell. What do you think? Will Portia and Ellen find their way back to each other? Or is this the beginning of a new path for both of them? Share your thoughts below. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into Hollywood's most emotional untold stories.